bell rang at 3:30, and for the next 4 or 5 hours, until bedtime, you entered a world that had absolutely nothing to do with teachers, classrooms, or education. This was your time, after school time. And if you grew up in Britain in the 1970s, those hours between the final bell and the moment your mum told you to get to bed were some of the most vivid, chaotic, brilliant hours of your entire childhood. Nobody planned them. Nobody organized them. There were no after-school clubs, no enrichment programs, no curated activities designed to boost your university application 20 years in the future. You just came home, dropped your bag, and got on with it. And what you got on with was always, without fail, exactly the same set of things that every other child in Britain was doing at exactly the same time. This is what those hours looked like, and if you lived them, you'll remember every single one. First, the walk home, because in the 70s, almost every child walked to school. Your mum might have taken you in the first year or two of primary school, but by the time you were 7 or 8, you walked with your mates. And the walk home was an event in itself. You'd come out of the school gates in a swarm, hundreds of children pouring onto the pavement at once, shouting, pushing, trading insults, comparing notes on the day. The walk home took 3 times longer than it needed to, because nobody went directly. You'd stop at walls to walk along the top of them. You'd kick a stone the entire way, trying not to lose it into the gutter. You'd take detours through alleyways and cut-throughs that adults didn't know existed. Someone would dare someone else to knock on a door and run. Someone would find something disgusting in a hedge, and everyone would gather round to examine it. And you'd stop at the shops. The corner shop near the school was always rammed at 20 to 4. Children crammed into a space the size of a small bathroom, clutching their pocket money, trying to decide between a curly-whirly and a packet of space dust. The shopkeeper watched you like a hawk because he knew full well that a percentage of his stock was leaving the premises in blazer pockets. A penny chew, a fruit salad, a blackjack, a bag of crisps. You'd walk the rest of the way home eating sweets and arriving at your front door with a sticky face and no appetite for tea. You'd let yourself in with the key on a string around your neck. Not every child, but a lot of children were latchkey kids. Your mum might be at work, or she might be in the kitchen, or she might be next door having a cup of tea with the neighbour. Either way, you came in, dumped your school bag in the hallway where someone would trip over it later, and the first question was always the same. What's for tea? Tea, not dinner. Dinner was what you'd had at school at lunchtime. The evening meal was tea, and it happened at 5 o'clock or thereabouts, and it was non-negotiable. But between getting home and sitting down for tea, you had roughly an hour and a half of freedom, and how you used it depended on the weather, the season, and what was on television. Because if it was raining, or if it was winter, or if you just couldn't be bothered going back outside, you watched television. And children's television in the 70s was something special. You'd get home just in time for the afternoon programs. On BBC One, there was Blue Peter, the program that taught an entire generation how to make things out of washing up liquid bottles and sticky-backed plastic. Valerie Singleton, John Noakes, Peter Purves, and later Leslie Judd. You watched it religiously, even when the items they were making were clearly beyond your skill level and would end up as a heap of glue and cardboard on the kitchen table. John Noakes climbing Nelson's column. Shep the dog causing chaos. The Blue Peter garden being vandalized. It was essential viewing. There was Jackanary, where someone sat in a chair and read you a story for 15 minutes. It sounds almost absurdly simple by modern standards, but it was completely absorbing. Bernard Cribbins could make any story feel like the most important thing in the world. You'd sit and you'd listen, and for 15 minutes the living room disappeared and you were somewhere else entirely. On it V, there was Magpie, Blue Peter's slightly cooler rival, and then the programs that burned themselves into your memory forever. Bagpuss with its saggy cloth cat and its mice who sang on the mouse organ, the clangers whistling away on their little planet, Mr. Ben who walked through the door of a fancy dress shop every episode and emerged into a different adventure, the Wombles clearing up Wimbledon Common, Ivor the engine puffing through the Welsh valleys, Rainbow with Zippy, Bungle and George. You'd lie on the carpet, chin on your hands, 6 inches from the screen because your mum hadn't told you to move back yet. The picture was slightly fuzzy because the aerial needed adjusting. The set was probably rented from Radio Rentals and it took 30 seconds to warm up after you pressed the button. But when it flickered to life and the familiar theme tune started, you were gone. Transported happy, but when the weather was decent, television could wait. Because playing out after school was where the real action happened. You'd bolt your bread and jam, shout to your mum that you were going out, and you were gone. Straight out the back door and into the street, the alley, the estate, the field, wherever your particular patch was. Football was the default. Every spare piece of ground in Britain became a football pitch between 4 and 6 o'clock on a weekday afternoon. Jumpers for goalposts. Teams picked on the spot, oldest kids choosing first, youngest kids standing hopefully at the end. Arguments about whether the ball went in or over. Arguments about offside. Arguments about everything, really. Because there was no referee and nobody could agree on anything. Headers, volleys, diving saves on concrete that took the skin off your elbows. You played until you couldn't see the ball anymore, and then you played a bit longer by streetlight. Girls had their own rituals that ran alongside. Skipping ropes that stretched across the entire pavement, with 2 turners and a queue of girls waiting to jump in, chanting rhymes that had been passed down through generations. Hopscotch chalked onto the paving stones in front of the houses, clapping games with elaborate hand patterns and words that made no sense but had to be performed at increasing speed. Handstands against the wall, seeing who could stay up longest. Elastics, where you looped a giant elastic band around 2 people's ankles and jumped in and out of it in increasingly complex patterns. Then there were the games that everybody played, regardless. Knockdown Ginger, which involved knocking on someone's front door and running away before they answered. This was considered the absolute height of comedy. Kirby, where you stood on opposite sides of the road and tried to bounce a ball off the opposite curb so it came back to you. 40-40, a version of hide-and-seek that covered entire streets and could last until darkness fell and your mum started shouting. Building dens was a seasonal obsession. In summer, you'd find a patch of wasteland, an overgrown garden, a gap between garages. And you'd construct a shelter out of whatever was lying around. Planks of wood, old doors, bin bags, pieces of carpet that smelled of damp. The den was your territory. You defended it fiercely against rival gangs from the next street. You furnished it with stolen cushions and half-eaten biscuits. It was damp, uncomfortable, occasionally structurally unsound, and absolutely perfect. Collecting things was a massive part of after-school life. Football stickers were the biggest. Panini albums, usually released before a major tournament, were traded with the intensity of a stock exchange floor. You'd stand in the playground with a fistful of duplicates, shouting out numbers. Got, need, got. The goal was to complete the album, which almost nobody ever did, because there were always 3 or 4 stickers that seemed to exist only in legend. Conker's season lasted from September into November, and during those weeks it consumed every waking moment. You'd spend your after-school hours scouring horse chestnut trees, picking through the fallen spiny cases to find the biggest, hardest specimens. The rituals of preparation were elaborate, soaking in vinegar, baking in the oven on a low heat. Some kids swore by coating them in clear nail varnish. A champion conker, a niner or a tenner, was a source of genuine social status. And then the call would come. Your name, bellowed from a back door or a kitchen window, carrying across 3 gardens and a fence. Tea was ready. Tea in the 70s was not a complicated affair. Fish fingers, chips and beans, sausages and mash, egg and chips, cheese on toast, beans on toast. Toast with just about anything, really. It was quick, it was filling, and it was designed to be eaten at speed so you could get back outside before it got dark, or get in front of the television for the evening programs. You ate at the kitchen table, or in some households, on a tray on your lap in the living room. There was squash to drink, orange or lemon, mixed from a bottle of concentrate that seemed to last forever. Or tea, actual tea, because children drank tea in the 70s from a surprisingly young age. Milky, 2 sugars, in a mug with a chip in the rim. Homework was a theoretical obligation that most children treated with the same enthusiasm they treat a trip to the dentist. You had to do it, technically, your teacher had set it, your mum would ask if you'd done it. But the amount of effort invested was, in most cases, the absolute minimum required to avoid getting into trouble. Some maths problems copied hastily from the back of someone else's book. A few sentences about what you did at the weekend, wildly exaggerated. A drawing coloured in with felt tip pens that had gone dry 3 months ago. 20 minutes, tops. Reading was more common than people remember. Not all children played out every night. Some came home, went to their bedroom, and read for hours. Enid Blyton was still everywhere despite the controversy that would catch up with her. Roald Dahl was writing some of his best work. And comics were a universe unto themselves. The Beano, the Dandy, Whizzer and Chips, the Victor, Warlord, Jackie for the girls, Bunty. You'd read them cover to cover, then trade them with your mates, then read them again until the pages fell apart. The evening wound down predictably. A bath if it was bath night, which was not every night because baths were expensive and families were careful about hot water. The immersion heater would go on an hour beforehand, and the whole family would use the same water, one after another, topping it up as it cooled. You'd wash, you'd put on your pyjamas, and you'd sit in front of the television for the last hour of the day. If you were lucky, you'd catch something good before being sent upstairs. If you were unlucky, your dad had control of the dial and you were watching the news or a documentary about something you'd never heard of. Either way, by 8:30 or 9 o'clock, you were being told to go up. You'd read under the covers with a torch, or you'd lie in the dark listening to the sounds of the house settling around you. The murmur of the television downstairs, your parents talking in the kitchen, a dog barking somewhere outside, the creak of the floorboards, and then sleep, deep and dreamless, because you'd spent 4 solid hours burning energy in ways that no child today would be allowed to do. Those after-school hours don't exist in the same way anymore. The walk home has become a car journey. The corner shop has become a Costa. The playing out has become a scheduled activity with a consent form and a risk assessment. The television that once gathered the whole country's children in front of the same 3 channels at the same time has fragmented into 1,000 streaming services, each child watching something different on a different screen in a different room. None of which is necessarily bad. The world moves. Things change. Childhoods adapt. But if you were there, if you lived those hours between 3:30 and bedtime in a British town in the 1970s, you know that something extraordinary happened every single weekday afternoon. Something unplanned, unsupervised, and completely free. You came home. You watched telly. You went out. You played until you couldn't see. You came in for tea. You did your homework in 15 minutes. You had a bath. You went to bed. And tomorrow you do it all again. Exactly the same. And you wouldn't change a single thing.